Come closer. The shadows have missed you, and tonight they have a new story to tell. Welcome to Scary Stories After Dark. The night air smelled of damp leaves and cheap candy. On the edge of Necro Hollow, 17-year-old Kendra stomped down the cracked sidewalk in her witch costume, heels of her boots clacking like nails on stone. Her pillowcase of candy thudded against her leg with each step, stuffed with the spoils of a long night. "Idiots," she muttered, flicking her lighter and taking a drag from a bent cigarette she stole from her brother. "Trick-or-treating's for kids." The wind shifted, a crinkle echoed from the alley. She froze. Not the scuttle of a raccoon, not the rustle of leaves. This sound was sharper. Like the tearing of plastic, the snap of a mask's elastic strap, the sticky rip of duct tape peeling away. A shadow lurched from the trash-strewn alley, tall and bent wrong. The thing shuffled into the streetlight, a patchwork body of discarded Halloween. Plastic vampire masks fused into a twisted grin, rubber fangs jutting from a melted jaw, black and orange fabric stitched crudely into flesh. The eyes behind the masks were hollow slits that burned faintly. In its hand dangled a cracked pumpkin bucket, the kind kids begged candy with. The Stitched Trickster rasped, voice like rappers grinding together. "Candy." Kendra laughed nervously. "Nice costume, not getting mine." She tightened her grip on the pillowcase and took another drag. The trickster tilted its head. The seams of its body tightened, flexing like scar tissue. It held out the bucket, closer, shaking it expectantly. "Candy." Kendra spat smoke. "Go to hell." The plastic body split open with a tearing sound. Needle-like threads shot out, snagging the pillowcase and ripping it from her hands. Chocolate bars and lollipops spilled into the gutter, but the trickster didn't stop. The threads lashed around her wrists, her throat pulling her toward its patchwork chest. Her scream choked out as she was dragged against the hot stink of melted rubber. The trickster forced a cracked mask over her face, stitching it to her skin with candy wrappers that burned like wax. At dawn, joggers found nothing left of Kendra but that mask in the gutter, its painted smile cracked wide. Morning bled slow over Necro Hollow, a gray wash of sky sagging above rows of brick storefronts and sagging telephone wires. The town always looked half asleep, like it had never shaken off the 1980s. VHS rental signs sun-faded in the windows, hand-painted pizza parlor logos peeling, even the gas station still selling cassette tapes by the register. But October woke it up. Plastic jack-o'-lanterns grinned from every porch, scarecrows slumped against lampposts, and paper bats clung to bakery windows. Main Street reeked of cinnamon brooms, pumpkin bread, and that faint rubber smell of dollar store decorations. Every year the town made a spectacle of it, hay bales on every corner, orange lights strung across rooftops, a giant plastic pumpkin balloon tethered to the library roof. The locals called it Halloween Pride, outsiders called it obsessive. At Finch's bakery, Mrs. Finch was already setting out sugar cookies frosted like jack-o'-lanterns. The smell of fresh bread wafted into the street, pulling kids in with quarters clutched in sticky hands. Across from it, Rico's Pizza Palace turned on its neon sign, one flickering orange slice that buzzed faintly, the sound somehow comforting in its imperfection. A bell chimed as the door to Blockbuster Video swung open. Inside, horror VHS tapes lined the walls in their lurid cardboard sleeves. Fright Night, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Pumpkinhead, Child's Play 2. The covers leered in garish 80s airbrush style, promising carnage and monsters that never quite lived up to the artwork. And then came the group. Shanley kicked the door open first, tall, 33, her leather jacket patched with band logos. "Friday night, losers," she announced, sweeping into the store like she owned it. CJ followed close behind, 30, sarcastic grin, already loading ammunition. He wore an oversized flannel and carried a 2-liter of Pepsi like a trophy. Yeah, movie night royalty has arrived. Jamie slipped in quietly, 28, her denim jacket sleeves rolled up, her smile tired but warm. She carried a bag of cheese puffs under one arm and waved half-heartedly at the clerk. And last, Macab, 33, black trench coat, sarcastic eyebrow cocked at everything. He carried nothing as usual. "If it's not Carpenter or Romero, I'm walking out." Their ritual was older than their rent checks. Every Friday, the 4 of them scavenged the horror section, argued over slashers, loaded up on junk food, and crashed back at their shared rental house on Birch Street. It was nostalgia clinging hard, like they were still teenagers trying to hide from the world with bad movies and sugar highs. "Fright Night 2 or Pumpkinhead?" CJ asked, holding both tapes like he was about to start a holy war. Shanley smirked. "Neither," chopping mall. They groaned in unison. Outside, the morning paper hit the curb with a wet slap. The headline screamed in thick black letters, "Local teen vanishes on Halloween night. Only a mask left behind." No one inside the store noticed. Not yet. Necro Hollow moved through October like a sleepwalker wrapped in orange lights. The festival prep was everywhere. Hand-painted signs advertising the Pumpkin Patch Bash leaned against shop windows. School kids taped construction paper bats to light poles. A hay wagon rolled down Main Street, spilling straw like breadcrumbs, its driver humming a tune off-key. At the bakery, Mrs. Finch stacked pumpkin pies in the display, their crusts perfectly crimped. "Best in the county fair 3 years in a row," she told anyone who lingered too long at the glass. At Rico's Pizza, the owner balanced a plastic skeleton on the roof, muttering at it like a sworn enemy every time the wind knocked it down. The townsfolk joked, but underneath the chatter was static. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Another teen was missing, and all the police found was a mask. At Blockbuster, Shanley and the others returned their stack of tapes, ignoring the headline folded on the counter. Jamie caught sight of it, just for a second, her smile faltering. "Local teen vanishes." She didn't mention it. Not yet. By evening, fog crept in low over the sidewalks, curling around pumpkins like spilled smoke. The Halloween festival's midway rides blinked on early, testing their bulbs, neon orange, sickly green, the hum of electricity filling the air. That's when the screaming started. Behind Rico's Pizza, 2 middle schoolers were trading candy, huddled by the dumpsters. One, a boy in a cracked Jason mask, clutched a plastic pumpkin bucket, The other shoved a Snickers into his hand. "Trade me your Reese's," the boy begged. A shadow uncoiled from the alley. The Stitched Trickster emerged, towering under the flickering security light. His patchwork skin rippled, stitched with candy wrappers and old cloth. Plastic fangs clacked in his melted jaw. The bucket in his hand rattled with coins, candy, and something wet. "Candy," it rasped. The boys froze. Jason Mask Boy gave a nervous laugh. "Cool costume." He held out his bucket like a peace offering. The trickster reached inside, sorting the candy with stiff, clawed fingers. The wrappers crinkled too loud in the still night. It plucked out the Reese's, stared, then snapped the chocolate in half. The sound was like bone. It dropped the candy, turned its hollow eyes back on the boys. Wrong. Threads whipped from its body, snagging Jason Mask Boy by the arms. The second kid screamed, bolting into the street as the trickster dragged its prey against its patchwork chest. The boy thrashed, his mask tearing free, only to be stitched into the trickster's body as if it had always been part of him. By the time the cops arrived, all they found was the mask in the gutter, rain pooling in its empty eye holes. The festival lights blinked back to life, humming cheerful orange, as if nothing had happened at all. Friday night meant Blockbuster, greasy takeout, and a living room floor littered with VHS boxes and candy wrappers. It was their ritual, a stubborn anchor from high school that followed them into adulthood like a pact. The four of them sprawled across the rental house's sagging couches, horror tapes stacked high on the coffee table. An old tube TV hummed static before Chopping Mall flickered to life, grainy and loud, the synth score spilling through the living room. Shanley sprawled against the armrest, a soda balanced on her knee. "You're all gonna regret this choice," she said, smirking as the movie's first kill unfolded. "Better than another Romero rerun," CJ shot back, mouth full of pizza. "Besides, killer robots in a mall, that's peak cinema." Jamie curled up with a blanket, quietly laughing, her eyes on the screen but her mind elsewhere. Every time the film's music dipped, she swore she heard something outside, faint crinkles like a wrapper being twisted open. Macab lit a cigarette, smoke curling into the dim light. "You're all wrong. Nothing beats Carpenter. End of debate." The banter was familiar, easy, but tonight it felt thinner, stretched over something brittle. On the TV, a security guard was electrocuted to death. The group laughed, loud and unguarded, until the news bulletin interrupted the tape. The VCR spit static. A voiceover cracked through. "Another body discovered tonight in Necro Hollow. Police are asking residents to remain indoors after dark until further notice. The only evidence recovered was a mask." The screen went black, leaving only their reflections in the glass. Nobody moved. The only sound was the fizz of CJ's Pepsi can opening too loud. Shanley finally broke it. "Masks? You hear about that other kid too?" "Probably some psycho screwing with the town," Macab muttered. "Halloween brings out the idiots." Jamie tightened her blanket around her. "No, it's happening too often. Something's wrong." CJ tried to laugh, but it came out flat. "Oh, come on. We live in a horror movie cliché already. Small town, weird disappearances, killer on the loose. We're one montage away from becoming the victims." Nobody laughed this time. Outside, the wind scraped dead leaves across the porch, dry and brittle. It almost sounded like plastic. The pumpkin patch bash arrived in a blaze of orange and noise, every inch of Necro Hollow dressed like a cheap holiday postcard. Carnival booths lined Main Street, caramel apples dripping sticky sweetness, a ring toss with glow-in-the-dark skulls, and a face-painting stand where a teenager traced perfect black triangles beneath children's eyes. The giant plastic pumpkin on the library roof bobbed like a watchful moon. Laughter spilled into the evening air, but beneath it, something taut as a wire hummed. Shanley, CJ, Jamie, and Macab pushed through the crowd like veterans of their town's yearly mania, half participants, half spectators. Shanley clutched a paper cup of cider, cheeks flushed. CJ carried a greasy pizza slice for Jamie, triumphant. Macab scanned the crowd with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Jamie moved silently beside them, fingers sticky from cotton candy, listening to the festival's small chords as if they might rearrange into something terrible. They joked, they traded quips. They scanned for old friends and made a point to avoid the news vans parked by the library. Necro Hollow had always been loud on Halloween. This year it felt louder, like the town was shouting to drown out fear. Near the pumpkin patch, a stage hosted a local band in cheap monster masks. Children shrieked on a hay bale maze. A line snaked out of the haunted maze attraction, and the scent of smoke machines and burnt sugar hung like perfume. Above it all, orange bulbs hummed in a lazy conspiracy. Then the first wrong note slipped in. A child's scream that carried too high and too close. It started small. A woman turned, eyes wide, her hand fluttering toward her mouth. People followed her gaze. A man in a skeleton hoodie staggered backward, his bucket of candy skittering across the asphalt. Where the bucket had been, there was a smear of something dark and glossy. Someone hissed. The band faltered. The trickster moved like a rumor, at once in the alleys and inside the crowd. It was clever now, patient, practiced in tools of fear. It didn't always need to tear through someone to claim them. Sometimes a reach of its stitched hand, a snatch of a sleeve, a whispering demand was enough to break a person. A teenage girl in a glittery vampire cape held up a handful of candy, trembling. "Please," she mouthed. "Please take it." Her voice was too small. The trickster's head tilted, its mask mosaic smile was almost gentle. It reached, and the town held its breath. A sugar-pale old man tried to pull her away, affronted, angry. "You don't..." He was cut off when the trickster's threads lashed out, snagging his wrist and yanking him forward. The old man stumbled, and his hat flew off into a puddle. People screamed 100 different pitches. Shanley saw it then, the way the trickster moved, the way dirty wrappers flapped like wings from its seams. She lunged before she thought, grabbing the girl's other arm. CJ was right behind her, pulling with every scrap of muscle he had. Together they yanked the girl free, and the trickster's threads ripped through the empty air, snagging only fabric. The crowd scattered in a sudden, furious tide. People pushed and shoved toward the safety of lit storefronts. A kid toppled a hay bale in the scramble and tumbled into a display of plastic skeletons that clattered like a dropped tray of bones. "You all right?" CJ barked to the girl, breathless, eyes wide as saucers. She nodded, eyes enormous, glitter streaked with tears. It wanted my candy. She pointed at the alley where the trickster had disappeared like a seam unstitched. Macab's jaw was tight. This is getting worse, fast. He looked up at the giant pumpkin on the library, its tethered ropes creaking in the wind like a groan. We can't wait for cops to figure this out. They're already overwhelmed. Across the street, a news camera panned, its lens catching the chaos. Someone shouted into their phone, calling for help. Somewhere behind them, a child sobbed for a lost parent. The festival, which moments ago had been a staged, comforting chaos, had tipped into real panic. Jamie steadied herself against a lamppost, the glow painting hollow shadows across her face. "We have to go to the pumpkin patch," she said, voice low as if the words themselves could summon the trickster. "It started at the edge of town. It's connected to the patch somehow, maybe where all those old costumes get tossed. That's where it's getting its parts." Shanley's fingers clenched around her cider cup until cardboard creased. "We go. But we do it smart. We don't be dumb, like the movies. We plan." They moved like a unit then, slipping through the smaller streets to avoid the press of the crowd. Necro Hollow, in all its Halloween glory, was a map of possible ambushes, alleyways, piled trash bags, old carnival props. Every shadow could be a seam waiting to pull. At the edge of town, the pumpkin patch rose like a field of patient heads, orange globes bobbing in the low light. Behind it, a line of chain link concealed a long slope of landfill, an ugly scar in the town's otherwise quaint shape. It was where they said residents dumped last year's costumes, the town's worn-out ghosts. The air grew colder as they approached. The trickster's work smelled faintly of melted plastic and sugar, the peculiar perfume of something made of refuse and childhood. "Whatever's in that dump," Macab said, whispering, "we don't know how to kill it, but we'll figure out a way to slow it down." They didn't know, not yet, that every step toward the landfill stitched the trickster a little tighter. They didn't know how close they were to being the next things sewn into its hide. All they had was each other and the brittle courage that comes from having nowhere else to run. A shadow moved at the foot of the slope, low and wrong. Something clicked like zipper teeth, an army of masks whispering together as if in greeting. Shanley looked at her friends. "On 3, she said, "we go together." They didn't notice, in the hush before their count, the small orange wrapper that fluttered to the ground between CJ's shoes, a candy wrapper folded neatly into the shape of a mask. 1, 2, 3. The darkness peeled back, and the trickster smiled. They crept up the slope toward the landfill, with flashlights trembling in their hands like tiny beacons of defiance. The town's festival was a dim hum below them, far enough that the lights looked like a different world, safer, softer, unaware. The dump smelled of rain-soaked cardboard, old popcorn, and the sharp plastic tang of melted masks. Moonlight made the piles of rejected costumes glisten like wet seaweed, every step crunched with a brittle hush. "This is stupid," CJ whispered, because talking sounded braver than silence. "Why are we here again?" "To stop it," Shanley said simply. There was no swagger in it, only the raw, stubborn muscle of someone who refuses to let friends die alone. Jamie fumbled with a flashlight and a roll of duct tape. "We're not heroes. We're 4 idiots with a plan." Macab's voice was low. "Idiots who have an edge. We know horror tropes. The trickster seems to follow rules. Let's use that." They spread out at the ridgeline, sweeping beams across the wreckage. There were remnants of last year's costumes, a foam werewolf glove, a stiff plastic witch hat, a shredded vampire cape tangled in a fence. When Shanley's light hit a heap of masks, they seemed to blink back, 100 blank faces watching. A soft shuffle and then a creak, like seams pulling in the dark. The trickster was near. They found it at the center of a shallow pit, hunched over a newly forming bulge in its torso. Something small and still, wrapped in silver wrappers and sewn in with gummy threads. The thing's body had changed since the first nights. Now more masks, more fabric, candy wrappers braided into its seams like metals. Its head cocked, a dozen masks layered into a mocking, shifting grin. Shanley's hand tightened into a fist. "We distract it. Jamie, you and I go left. CJ, you and Macab circle right. Don't get fancy. Yank its threads if you can. If it wants candy, give it candy, then pull it into the pit." She sounded reckless and reasonable all at once. They moved like practiced thieves, breath shallow, hearts loud. Jamie tossed a handful of candy toward the trickster. It didn't look at the candy at first. It looked at the thrown wrappers, the way they fluttered. Then it reached, slower than before, to sort them, as if savoring the ritual of choice. That was their opening. CJ and Macab ran in, grabbing at seams with gloves on, ripping at the trickster's patchwork hide. The thing screamed, a sound like plastic tearing and hollow laughter, and threads lashed back, trying to snag them. Shanley dove, fingers bloodied as she tore at a melted mask fused to a stitched shoulder. Jamie jammed duct tape into a seam and kicked, trying to topple the monstrous collage. For a breath, it looked like they might succeed. The trickster staggered, a trail of scattered candy and torn fabric falling like snow. But monsters made of junk are resilient. Each new victim had given it a fresh piece, an extra jaw, a stiffer limb. With every pull, the trickster became stranger and stronger. It lashed out, and Macab went down, seized by a web of gummy threads. He screamed once, a broken, sharp sound, and Shanley lunged, ripping wrappers from where they clung to his jacket. Jamie cut the threads with a pocket knife, and CJ dragged Macab out, breath heaving. He was alive. He was shaken. They were alive. They kept pulling. The pit was finally near. The trickster's head, a mosaic of grins, turned a dozen faces toward them, and for a second its stitched mouths moved in chorus. Add, add, add. Jamie shoved a fistful of candy into the trickster's patched maw and yanked. The thing convulsed. A hem of melted rubber snapped loose. Shanley wrapped her arms around the waist of the monstrous thing, and with all the friends' combined weight, shoved it toward the pit. It fell. For a breathless second, the world held. Then the trickster's threads shot up from below the earth, writhing like roots, pulling, trying to climb out. The pit was shallow. Something in the ground answered its hunger. Shanley heard the muffled squeal of fabric and the crack of old plastic. She pushed until her arms burned. CJ grabbed her hand. Together they shoved the last of it into the maw of the dark. Silence. They panted, soaked in sweat and grease and the sick, sweet scent of melted candy. The moon watched. The town's festival noise was a distant drumbeat, as if someone had turned the world's volume down to hush a child. For a moment, an almost sacred, fragile second, they allowed themselves to believe it was over. Then a small rustle at the opposite side of the pit pulled them up like a hook. Something shifted under the ground, a mask, half buried, rolled free and caught the moon. It was one of the kids' masks from earlier, now stitched to an old party hat, and from inside the mound, a tiny, horrifying sound. The soft crinkling of wrappers, like someone breathing through paper. They'd stalled it, they'd wounded it, but they hadn't killed the stitchwork of whatever it was. They had put a patch on a monster that was hungry and clever. It would mend, scavenge, find more parts, and come again when it needed. They leaned on each other in the cold. Macab's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, not because he wanted nicotine, but because the ritual steadied him. Shanley wiped grease off her lips with the back of her hand and laughed once, a shaky sound. "We did it," she said, but she sounded tired enough that her victory tasted sour. Jamie bent, picked up the small mask in the dirt, and folded it into her palm. The painted smile was cracked, eyes empty. She tucked it into her jacket pocket, a small talisman against forgetting. They walked back toward town, slow and watchful, every shadow a question, every wind, gust, a whisper. The trickster had been shoved back into its pit, but the war for Necro Hollow wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Epilogue. Dawn found the town washed in the thin light of a world still pretending to be ordinary. People returned to clean up and condolences. The festival banners were frayed, the pumpkin balloon sagging on its tether. Reporters filed breathless updates. The sheriff chalked circles and blinked at the camera. Shanley, CJ, Jamie, and Macab sat on Finch's bakery stoop with paper cups of coffee, grease on their fingers, and something heavier in their chests. They had a bruise that would not go away, an intimacy born of shared terror and survival. "That mask thing," CJ said finally, voice flat. "We should hand it over. Evidence. Proof." He gestured to Jamie's jacket pocket. Jamie looked at the little folded mask and then tucked her fingers around it. "We should," she agreed. "But I can't. Not yet." Her thumb stroked the cracked smile like a secret. "We need time. We need to know what we made it from. If it's pulling parts, it'll be back for what it wants." They argued in a dozen small ways for the next hour and then did nothing of consequence, because sometimes survival just means breathing and not making the mistake of pretending you're unaffected. At noon, a kid splashed through a gutter in front of the bakery and came up gasping, holding a soggy plastic mask. He looked at the adults with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of children who know the world's rules have shifted. Mrs. Finch wrapped the kid in a towel and called his parents. The world bent around the small ruptures and tried to stitch itself back together. That evening, as the sun folded into the horizon and the town's lights blinked on like a string of reluctant stars, Jamie unbuttoned her jacket. In the glow of a street lamp, she slipped the small mask into the mailbox outside the sheriff's office, a careful gesture, half evidence, half warning. She left a note tucked inside the mask's tiny hollow. "Watch for wrappers, watch for seams." When she walked away, a woman on the opposite corner bent to pick up a piece of trash, a candy wrapper folded into the shape of a tiny mask, just like the one Jamie had kept. She tossed it into the bin without a second thought. It stuck slightly and then fluttered free again on a stray gust of wind, landing at the broom of the giant pumpkin on the library roof. Inside the landfill, under mud and broken costume pieces, something shifted. A thread tightened. Somewhere in the dark, plastic creaked like a slow, thoughtful laugh. Necro Hollow breathed in, it breathed out. Life attempted to patch itself over the raw edges of the night. But at the edge of town, on Birch Street, where the four friends shared a house, Jamie paused and looked back toward the landfill as if she could see through the hills. Her hand went to her jacket pocket, where the small mask had been earlier. It wasn't there any longer. The mask had been taken. She shared a look with Shanley across the street, and neither of them smiled. The stitched grin was patient. It had time. And Necro Hollow was a town that loved to throw things away.